So we're going to bring on our first guest, and he's been on the show before. His books are among, at least one of his books is in my top 20 books of all time. And his name is Leonard Pitts. He's a national best-selling author. He's also a journalist. And his book, Freeman, if you haven't read it, it's in my top 20 of all time. And I've read thousands of books. So that
You
one.
were reading that book when we were in Philadelphia.
No, not that one. No, this book, I read this book. This book is at least 10 years old.
But no, weren't you reading one of Leonard's books while we were in Philadelphia, though? Or maybe you were just telling me about it.
Yes, I was, but it was The Last Thing You Remember. I think that's the title.
Okay.
That's the title, Leonard.
Surrender.
Surrender. Okay, The Last Thing You Surrender. That was the book I was reading in Philly 2 years ago. But no, Freeman is about 10 years old. Is that right, Leonard?
About 14. Came out in 2012.
Okay, so that one.
12,
12 years, I guess.
Yeah.
That's in my top 20 of all time. And it was an amazing story. And you have a new book. And I have a copy of it.
Yay.
You may have a copy. I haven't read it yet. My to-be-read shelf is so very extensive, but I bought it because I plan to read it. And for those of you all who, I didn't know you had won a Pulitzer Prize. Did you win it for one of your books?
No, I won it for commentary for my newspaper column back in 2004.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, so this, you may recognize the image, and it's the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And yes, so this novel, he's going to tell us what it's all about. And welcome back to Black Authors Matter TV.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always glad to talk about books, especially mine.
Well, you know, it's good to toot your own horn, you know, and your writing is so solid.
Thank you. Thank you. I spent enough time learning how to do it. I guess I hope I have figured one or two things out.
How long have you been a lover of writing?
Since I was 5 years old. So that's 61 years. Yeah.
Wow.
When I was 5, I told my mom that I was a writer. I was going to be a writer when I, professionally. And I started sending stuff to magazines when I was 12. So, very
interesting that you developed that type of relationship with writing at such a young age. Most people at 5 years old are wanting to play games. They're wanting to go outside. What was it that just made you love writing?
I don't know. I just like the idea of being able to tell stories and move people. I remember in second grade, the teacher, she had an agreement with the class that if everybody behaved themselves, and at the end of class, Leonard would read one of his stories. And it's amazing when I think back on it. This wasn't considered punishment. This was like, this was a reward. So, it was great. I'd sit there, hands clasped, back straight, everybody let's behave because I want to read a story,
Oh, wow. No, none of my teachers offered that for the class. But I did get to teach a couple of classes, when they would let a student teach. If they, the smart students got to teach a class, I got to do that a couple of times. And I did win some essay contests. So I was reading at 4, but I wasn't really writing stories yet. I didn't start doing that till maybe second grade when I started. But you at 5, were you actually, what were your stories? Were they more like poems? Were they like
I wrote some poems. I wrote some poems. I wrote some stuff for church, but I wrote a lot of superhero stuff, about a boy with glasses who could fly and had super strength,
Okay.
that was my first major character.
Wow. So it was really your love for reading that fed your love for writing.
Yeah, I was reading Marvel Comics. That probably was a few years later, about 67. I was reading Beverly Cleary. I remember her very clearly. And H.A. Ray books, the Curious George books, all the stuff that kids were reading back then. Didn't have much use for Dick and Jane. I thought they were boring as heck, but,
Dick and Jane was just That was just classroom stuff. Nobody read that outside of class.
It's like, see, Dick, run, Dick, run. Go away, Dick.
It was an elementary way to introduce people to reading with simple words. That's what it was. But I hear you about things being boring when you're reading like 3 or 4 levels above your class.
Yeah.
It can be boring and you have to try to entertain yourself doing something. And sometimes the teachers recognize that and they'll continue to motivate you.
Well, I was lucky. I had pretty good teachers all along in terms of motivation. I remember in the 6th grade, the principal actually, Miss Boring, which is a terrible name for an educator, but
her name was Miss Boring.
Her name was Mrs. Boring, G. Renee Boring. Wow. And God bless her if she's still around, if she's still with us. But G. Renee Boring at St. Peter Street Elementary School. After school, I was allowed to go into the office and use the typewriters. I think they were just coming out with the IBM Selectric typewriters back then. And then to use the mimeograph. That'll tell you how long ago this was. This wasn't Xerox. These were mimeograph machines. Yeah. And make copies. Cranking the machine.
The test for the test.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I was allowed to do that. So I had encouragement from teachers all along. I have a long list of teachers I could thank.
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt like when teachers found out that you could read, they always wanted you to read. They started bragging on you. They actually fed into you wanting to be more educated because they just felt that you were smart because you were a good reader. At least that's what happened to me when I was growing up. I mean, I almost felt like it was a flex because, some of the other students were reading a little slower. And then when it was my turn to read, I'm reading faster. And they say, oh, she's reading too fast. And I'm like, I thought I was just reading normal.
Yeah, I did that and then wondered why the boys all hated me.
Exactly.
But you're listening to them struggle along and, it takes them, it's painful and they're going real slow. And okay, Leonard, you read. You just pick up and you're zipping and you're reading with expression, as they used to say. And then people are staring at you and you're like, whoa, what did I do? That's how clueless I was, I'm just reading. Doesn't everybody do it like this?
Yeah. The students still read aloud in school?
I do not know. I'd have to ask one of my grandkids. That's a good question.
I don't think they do, because that was a big thing. And everybody in elementary school, there was no separation by academic level. Like everybody was in the same classroom. Right. So there were some people who really couldn't hardly read at all.
Right.
The teachers still encouraged them. And then it was a wide range of skill sets for reading and for everything, because everybody was together. They didn't start separating for me. It was middle school when they started separating by academic level, but in elementary school everybody was together.
Yeah, I think I had that same experience. I was in school with kids who read well, and I was in school with kids who didn't read very well at all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was.
When did you first? What was your first book?
First novel. Novel.
Yeah, I guess novel, but book.
Well, there's a lot of ways to define that. There's a lot of ways to define it. I did some quickie pay the rent celebrity bios back in the 70s that I used to try to disown, but now they're all on the internet. So I can't pretend I didn't do those.
But did you ghostwrite them or
No, I wrote them, but they're like, you get a bunch of, it's the celebrity magazine Right On. I don't know if anybody remembers that. There's a black, I think they still exist actually. Their publishing company say they want a bio of the Jackson brothers, and they, so you take a bunch of clips and you take 2 weeks and you produce a story of the Jackson brothers, and so I did 4 or 5 of those, on various performers, and wasn't great literature, but kept the lights on, which was what it was intended. So those are my technically.
Were
those
celebrity memoirs a little different back then, though?
Yeah, I guess, but again, these weren't so much memoirs. The celebrities had no participation in them. It was just me
Uh,
cranking out, here's Stevie Wonder, here's the story of your life. And I tried to make it good, but it could only be so good because it's based on, a bunch of newspaper clips and old interviews
yeah.
that he did.
Okay, so it's more like almost like an essay,
Kind of.
long, extended essay.
I get, you could say that, and they filled it out with a lot of pictures and, paid me a flat fee and called it a book. But
Interesting.
those are my first. Then after that came Becoming Dad in 1998, which is part memoir, part meditation on African American men and fatherhood. And then the first novel would have been in 2009, and that's called Before I Forget.
Okay, I read that one too, but
Okay.
I read it after I read Freeman.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. After Freeman, I wanted to read your other work.
Okay. Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad.
Freeman was introduced me to your work, and I think I've read just about all the books.
Yeah, the
Have
way
I
Gwen
haven't
talked
read
about your
50.
books, it made me want to read your book because I was like, okay, I've got to start reading Leonard's books because the way Gwen doesn't talk about everybody's books.
No, I
So
don't.
she talks about somebody's book, that means that she really liked it.
Well, good. I'm pleased. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm tough because I'm a writer and
Uh,
I'm an avid reader, and I know when somebody really is putting effort into their work. And it's not just a cookie cutter or formulaic. Your books aren't
Right.
formulaic in that neither book is like the other. I mean, it's totally
yeah,
different story, but well written.
Well,
I'm
I
concerned
do
about.
understand your point on that. I don't like formulaic books either. So if you're able to write a book where every book feels a little different, and even if you're writing about a similar subject, it still feels different from other books on that same subject. And it shows a lot about your style of writing.
Well, I don't want to bore myself, first of all, and I, I'm very hard for me to impress because as you were saying, I know all my tricks and all. So if I can surprise me, if I can impress me, then I feel pretty good. The one constant in my books is probably there's always an element of African American history somewhere in there. But beyond that, the stories are all quite different. Uh, Grant Park is more of a political thriller. Freeman, I'd call a love story. So
Yes, it
yeah,
was.
yeah. So and the last thing you surrender is it's a bunch of things, but it's a war story, I guess, most of all, World War II story. So uh, I try to challenge myself. I want to do something different every time. I can't imagine doing the same thing the same way every time out. That sounds boring to me.
One
Well,
of our regular viewers just posted a comment. Curtis Steverson, he's a young man who watches the show almost
Uh,
every week. He said he just finished reading The Last Thing You Surrender this month, and it was a 5-star read. And he said, you are a fantastic storyteller.
well, thank you, Curtis. I appreciate that. A lot of people have trouble with The Last Thing You Surrender because it's if you look at even the reviews online, they say all say something to the effect of emotionally brutal, but I'm glad I read it, or something to that effect, because it was, but I wanted to tell the truth. We're talking about the Second World War. We're talking about racial violence, and I didn't want to sugarcoat that because I felt like the people who actually went through it deserve better than me making a Disney version of their experiences.
Yeah, our book club read that book, and it got a very high rating from our book club.
I'm pleased to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us about the new book, 54 Miles.
54 Miles takes the same characters from The Last Thing You Surrender, and it shoots them forward 20 years. So now we're in Alabama at the height of the voting rights campaign. The characters you'll remember from The Last Thing You Surrender, Thelma and George. Thelma and George have gotten married. He's a white minister, and she's a black. She's become a lawyer, and they're living in New York City. Their son Adam, who you met at the very end of The Last Thing You Surrender, has snuck off and gone back down to Alabama to join the voting rights campaign, and he gets beaten up on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and turns up missing. And this sets in motion a whole chain of events that reveals a family secret, a secret that's been kept from him, about that basically goes to the core of who he is and everything that he's ever thought that his family was and thought that he was. So it really kind of almost destroys the family, and it brings his father back down, George, back down to Selma, but it also brings Thelma back down, not to Selma, but to Mobile and Montgomery, to look for him. And for Thelma, this is a very difficult trip because she hates Alabama. She hates Alabama with a passion, and she hasn't been back in 20 years. The other major character is Luther, who is Thelma's brother. Having read the first book, you'll recall that when they were children, they saw their parents lynched at the front door in a really horrific way. They saw their parents maimed, tortured, and then burned alive at the front door. Luther was 9, and Thelma was almost 3. So she can't remember it, and he can't forget it. And he sort of made a life for himself, sort of made a peace with himself, overcome the alcoholism that was a big feature of his life for the first 30 years or 20 years, whatever, of his life. And then he discovers in a nursing home, enfeebled and having had a stroke, the man who killed his parents. And the man who never was punished, got away with it, went to court, and the white jurors looked at the evidence, including pictures of the crime in progress, and deliberated about an hour and 15 minutes and said not guilty. So this man has escaped scot-free for 43 years, and all of a sudden Luther finds him in a nursing home. And so the question is, well, what does he do? What does Luther do? What does justice look like in that event? I wanted to kind of deal with this whole idea of the consequences for our actions, for the things that are done against us as African Americans, because I think that in real life, too often there aren't consequences for things that are done, but seems like there's always forgiveness from us as Black folk. When you see some young boy shot or young woman shot, unarmed by police, there's always forgiveness, and there's always the plea for peace. And I don't criticize that. I think one of the best things about my people is our faith and our belief in a better day and forgiveness and whatever. But I also believe that forgiveness does not preclude consequences.
Absolutely.
And I think, so I wanted to deal with that whole idea of consequences. This man has escaped consequences for 43 years. So, what should Luther do? What does Luther do when he finds him there in that nursing home, helpless, all by himself?
It's really interesting listening to this story. A good friend of my mother's is Linda Lowry, who was the youngest person on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that day.
Okay.
And she met her a few years ago. And listening to Miss Linda tell her story, she talks a lot about many of the people who waged violence on the people who were peacefully marching, still living in Selma today. They're still intermingling with each other. Some of those people, like Linda, see those people every day and remember what happened to them. And it made me wonder, like, what do people actually do? You may not be able to forgive them, but then how do you feel like you can move past what happened when you see these people every single day?
Especially when those people, at least some of them, have not repented of what they did.
Exactly.
Jim Clark, the sheriff at the time, lived until I think 2005, 2006, somewhere in there, and never expressed any remorse for what he did. As a matter of fact, he defended what he did until the day he died. And I'm sure that there are many others like that. Now, the mayor at the time, James Smitherman, he later changed his tune and was reelected with a strong Black vote. But a lot of the other people that participated in that, what did become of them? What do they think? And I dare to say that most of them, or many of them at least, in their secret hearts, feel like what they did was the right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And they probably do feel that way within their heart of hearts, because they felt like they were standing up for something. I mean, not saying that they were right, but they felt like they were standing up for something. So when you believe something so fully and it's so ingrained in you that what we may see as evil, they think they're standing up for the good. And I don't know. And it's kind of a crazy situation. And that's not to say that I'm giving a pass to anybody who waged violence. Yeah, but it's just how do you find a middle ground with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you talk about how convinced they are that they are right. And I forget which book I read this in, but it was in one of the books that I was reading to do research for 54 Miles. There's a passage where somebody tells this white lady that that Jesus would not, approve of your segregated church. And she said, I know, and Jesus would be wrong. So it's like,
now that is what you call believing something.
So, when that's if that's your mindset, what can I even say to you?
Right.
You're never you're wrong.
And one thing I noticed, and I could be wrong, maybe I just notice it more, but I don't notice it with other people. They always ask Black people, do you forgive the person who killed your family member? I don't hear them asking other people that question. And so, and why would you ask somebody that? A lot of times these people haven't even been buried yet. It's still raw. And a person, if they do eventually forgive, which is very difficult, it takes time. It takes years, if ever.
Yeah.
Right.
I think what people tend to forget is that Black people are only human. And we're treated in those moments as if we're not, I mean,
Right.
By and large, we tend to be more, people of faith than the rest of the country. Black folks are more likely to go to church, more likely to report, believing in God, et cetera, et cetera. So I understand the forgiveness. And like I said, I'm not mad at forgiveness, but when that becomes the default, when you do something terrible and I'm just supposed to forgive you and never mind my feelings, never mind my humanity, never mind the fact that you deserve, that some consequences need to come down to you. Something's wrong with that picture. Something about that picture.
Even if I forgive, you still need to be punished.
Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, I can forgive, but you still need to face the consequences of what you did. I think that really came to head with the white police officer who I guess I don't know. I guess she went into the wrong apartment and saw this Black man in what was her apartment, but it was his apartment.
Yeah.
And she wound up killing him, and then his family all gave her this big love fest at the
sentencing
trial.
Yeah.
I thought that was a bit much.
Yeah, I had trouble with that. I'm torn between I don't want to tell you how to grieve, because it's your brother. And so, you do what you feel you need to do. I'm torn between that and that's a little bit soon for me to be embracing the woman who walked into my brother's apartment and killed him while he's peacefully, watching television and enjoying his place. That's a little bit in his own home. I mean, I don't have to hate you. I don't have to spit on you, but the whole thing about I'm going to hug you and heal you and cleanse you. Well, who's hugging me? Who's healing me? And who's cleansing me?
Yeah, I'd like to know where all of them are to this day. Does this lady keep in touch with them? Does she pay her pittance in any way toward this family? I'd like to know.
I may be wrong, and I'd have to double check, but I think I read somewhere that her lawyer is petitioning for a new trial. So, or for early release, because I think she got 10 years or something like that. Don't quote me, but I believe that something like that was
well, I'm going to believe you because you're a journalist.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Now your book seemed to pick a particular era or time in America, a particular span of time, and dig into it like very extensively by creating the characters and weaving in real events and facts.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a hallmark of your writing, which is to me which I love historical fiction. And so when a person is able to do that, and your books are page turners. Whenever I read one of your books, it was never boring, and I would be up late at night, and I couldn't stop until I finished. So
thank you.
And that's all. And this book isn't as thick as the other ones.
It isn't. I just write until the story is told.
Okay.
There you
I
go.
never try to, I'm never trying to hit a specific length or word count.
Mhm.
I think that was probably less shorter than The Last Thing You Surrender, but The Last Thing You Surrender is a very long book.
It is, but so was Freeman.
Yeah, Freeman. Freeman's pretty long too. Yeah, but I told my publisher once, okay, this book is coming in long, and he said, just tell the story you need to tell, and we'll figure out the rest of it, afterwards. So I tell the story I need to tell, and when the expression is when you're editing, cut out the boring part. So I tell the story, and then let me cut out the boring parts, the stuff that's not working, and move the story along.
Okay. So are you working on another book at this time, or this is?
No, you always got to keep something in the hopper. I've got a novel. Actually, I'm just gonna finish editing it probably in the next day or two. It's called The Angry House. It's a haunted house story. It's set in the slavery era, the enslavement and Jim Crow era, and also in this era. And it's basically about a house that was a enslaved person's cabin, and has now been turned into a room in a luxury hotel. All the enslaved people's cabins have been converted so that they have jacuzzis and flat screen TV. I'm sorry?
I said, that's crazy.
Yeah, well, they're doing that. But this particular cabin is sentient, and it's haunted by the things that it saw over those 200 years. So it's not really happy with what's been done to it, and so it's going to take some revenge.
So when is that slated to come out? Next year? Or
probably earliest will be next year, but I haven't even finished the editing, as I said, so that's up to the publisher. My job is to write them, and then they schedule them.
I love it. So now 54 miles.
Yes.
It's been about a week, right, since it was released?
Yeah, it came out on it's been, what is today, Tuesday? It's been exactly a week. Yes.
Last Tuesday.
So how's the feedback been so far? Or do you keep
up? Getting really good reviews. I got a review from the Washington Post which called it astonishing, which I've never had a book called astonishing, so that just really warmed my heart. I'm getting very good reviews all the way around. I know I will at some point, but I am yet to see a negative review. Everything is 4 and 5 stars.
That's awesome. I wish we could talk longer, but unfortunately, we've already reached the half-hour mark.
Hey, time flies.
It does, but we did put your website in the chat.
Okay.
And I want everybody to go out and get this book. I'm getting it myself. I guess I might have to catch up with Gwen, because she's read all of the books now.
Okay.
But I don't think she started on 54 miles yet, so maybe I can catch up with her.
Yeah, okay. No, I haven't started yet, so.
Yeah, I'll make sure to let me know what you think. Leave a review somewhere or something. I read all, unlike a lot of writers, I read all reviews. I love seeing what people think.
Awesome. We definitely will.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the show. And you have a wonderful evening, and congratulations on the success with the book.
Thank you for having me. Y'all take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.